That Sunday night, the Carter dining room glowed with a shade of yellow light that was too warm, the kind of light people used to make everything look softer than it really was. It spilled over Margaret Carter's white china plates with silver rims, over the tablecloth ironed so flat it almost looked arrogant, over the glass of red wine standing still beside the rosemary roast, over the cream-colored hydrangeas in the center of the table, as if fresh flowers alone could hide the stench of a lie. Emily Carter sat to Daniel's right, her back straight, her knees pressed together beneath the table, her left hand resting on her lap while her right hand clenched the white cloth napkin until her fingertips had begun to go numb. The room smelled of roasted beef, buttery potatoes, and the vanilla candle Margaret always lit for family dinners because she said a proper home should smell warm. But to Emily, that smell felt that night like a layer of sugar spread over bitter medicine. On the napkin in her hand, Daniel had just scribbled a short sentence in blue ink, his handwriting slanted, neat, and controlled, like everything he allowed other people to see. "I'm sorry for the confusion." When he finished writing it, he folded the edge of the napkin slightly and slid it toward her with 2 fingers, a movement so small that anyone else might have thought he was simply passing his wife something she had dropped. But Emily understood. After 12 years of marriage, she had learned Daniel's language in gestures almost no one else could hear. A hand placed on her wrist meant don't say more. A smile held a little too long meant he needed her to agree with his version of events in front of other people. "Could you help me explain this?" meant he had done something wrong and needed her to rap it in a softer voice. And that night the napkin was not a napkin. It was a script. It was the bowed head he wanted to borrow from her. It was an apology that did not belong to her, placed in her hand as if, for years now, her mouth had been where Daniel stored every responsibility he did not want to say out loud. The whole Carter family was waiting. Margaret sat across from Emily, her eyes red, her hands clasped together on the table, like a woman trying to preserve elegance while panic filled her chest. Robert Carter, Daniel's father, sat at the head of the table, chin slightly lifted, his face carrying the familiar severity of a man who had spent his life running the family construction company on reputation, money, and silence deployed at the right moment. Robert did not need to slam his hand on the table to make a room go quiet. He only had to put down his knife, only had to stare a little longer than usual, only had to exhale through his nose, slow and heavy, and Margaret would pour more water though no one had asked. Nathan would lower his head even farther, and Daniel would adjust the shoulder of his shirt as if standing before a private judge of the family. Nathan, Daniel's younger brother, sat low in his chair on the other side, shoulders collapsed, eyes fixed on the untouched food in front of him, looking like a man who had dropped a match into a gasoline shed, and was now praying someone would call it a small accident. There was still a small scratch across one of his knuckles, probably from one of those renovation sites he had once promised everyone would become the turning point of his life. And Daniel sat beside Emily in a pale blue shirt, sleeves rolled just enough, his voice low and courteous, as though he were speaking in a community meeting instead of asking his wife to apologize for his lie. He leaned closer to her, the familiar scent of cedarwood cologne making Emily feel more nauseated than heartbroken, and murmured, "All you have to do is say you're sorry for making everyone misunderstand. After that, I'll handle it." Emily turned to look at him. In that moment, what chilled her was not only that he had lied about the guarantee for Nathan's failed project, nor that his entire family was now looking at her as though she were partly responsible for the financial disaster that had just exploded. What chilled her was Daniel's calm. He was not trembling. He was not flushed. He did not look like a man caught using his wife's name to legitimize a decision she had never agreed to. He looked like a man who had planned for this moment all along, and had always believed that when it arrived, Emily would do what she had done for years. Breathe in, choose softer words, take the shame into herself, make the room easier to breathe in, then go home and hurt alone. 12 years earlier, Emily had believed that calmness was the very reason Daniel had fallen in love with her. They met at a small fundraiser for a summer reading program for underprivileged children in Charlotte, where Emily was then a young communications coordinator for an education nonprofit, and Daniel had been sent to represent his family's construction company, which had donated a modest amount but wanted to appear well in photographs. That evening, something went wrong with the sound system. The microphone shrieked in the middle of a speech. The host got flustered, the keynote guest was stuck in traffic, and Daniel, 30 years old at the time, stood backstage with a stack of papers in his hand, his face paling because the order of his remarks had suddenly been changed. Emily saw him breathing too fast, saw the way he tried to hide his panic by smoothing the edges of the papers, and perhaps because she had grown up in a house where people hid fear by wiping tables, folding towels, lowering their voices, she recognized it immediately. She did not know him, but she stepped over, took the pages from his hands, rearranged them, crossed out a few repetitive lines, handed him a glass of water, and said quietly, "You don't have to read it like a lawyer. Just say why children need books before they learn the world will be hard on them." Daniel looked at her then the way a drowning man looks at shore. He walked onto the stage and spoke better than his draft. He did not speak too long, did not brag about the company, did not mention his own name as much as the communications person had feared. He told a story about a child he had once met during a company volunteer day, about how the boy asked whether the school library had books about people who built houses, and the whole room went still in exactly the right way. Afterward, Daniel found Emily by the registration table, thanked her in a voice that sounded sincere, and said, "You have a way of making chaos feel like it can still be handled." That sentence went straight into the deepest part of Emily, the part raised by an anxious mother, a father who left too early, bills taped to the refrigerator, and a childhood in which she was often the one washing dishes quietly, so her mother would not cry harder. To be loved for making the world less chaotic sounded like being recognized. She did not understand yet that some compliments are the seed of a trap. When Daniel loved the calm she brought him, he also began learning how to lean on it. When she made everything feel bearable, he slowly forgot that some things should never have been placed on her to bear. In the early years, Daniel's lies were so small Emily almost felt ashamed to call them lies. In their second year of marriage, he forgot her mother's birthday. Not almost forgot, completely forgot. Emily had reminded him twice, once while they were having dinner and once by text on Friday morning. Daniel had answered with a heart emoji and the words, "I've got it." But on Sunday afternoon, Emily's mother called to thank her for the shawl and then asked very gently, "Daniel must be busy, sweetheart?" The way she asked was not accusatory, which made it hurt more. Emily knew at once there had been no flowers, no card, no call. When she asked Daniel, he grimaced, slapped his forehead, and said he had ordered flowers but they must have gone to the wrong address. That lie survived only 10 minutes, until Emily checked their shared email and found no confirmation. Daniel stood in the kitchen, one hand braced against the counter, his expression both apologetic and a little defensive. "I didn't want to upset you," he said. "I was going to reorder tonight and tell her the delivery was delayed." Emily was so angry her hands went cold, but instead of letting her mother know her son-in-law had forgotten, she called her back, laughed softly, and said Daniel had been caught up in something urgent, but had reminded her to choose the color her mother liked best. Daniel hugged her from behind after she hung up, his chin on her shoulder, and said, "Thank you. You always save me from making things worse." Back then, Emily was still soft. She told herself marriage was forgiveness, covering for each other when the other person was clumsy, choosing a calmer evening over an unnecessary fight. She did not know she had just taught Daniel the first lesson. That truth could be repaired by her gentle voice, that if he forgot, she would remember for him, if he lied, she would turn it into a misunderstanding, if he disappointed someone, she would place a cushion under his fall. After that, the shielding came more often, but never in one moment large enough to make her leave. Daniel promised to attend his niece's piano recital, and cancelled at the last minute because a client call couldn't be moved. Emily later discovered he had actually been at a bar with a contractor, not because he was cheating, only because he did not know how to say no to a meeting that might benefit his work, and he did not want to face the disappointed eyes of a 9-year-old girl waiting for her uncle in the third row. Emily bought the girl an expensive set of watercolors, wrote a card saying Uncle Daniel was so sorry, then handed it to Daniel to sign. He kissed her forehead and said, "You say things better than I do. If I called, I'd only make everyone upset." Another time, he forgot to send tax documents to the accountant on time, causing them to receive a small penalty. He told Robert the file had been delayed because the accountant needed additional documents from Emily, then came home and asked her to call and smooth it over, because Robert was tense about a new project. Emily called. She did not tell a blatant lie. She simply chose vague phrases, accepted a small part of the confusion on herself, and said she and Daniel would review their household process so it would not happen again. Robert later told Daniel, "Good thing your wife knows how to handle things." Daniel smiled. Emily stood beside him and smiled too. Once, Daniel promised an old Carter construction client that Emily could help write a few lines of introduction for a community grant application, though he had never asked her. When she reminded him that he was not allowed to use her nonprofit work as a free service, he sighed and said, "I just thought you liked helping with meaningful things. You make it sound like I'm using you." And still, she wrote it, because the recipient was a youth center that truly needed support, because she did not want them to suffer, because Daniel had overpromised, because if she refused, the one called ungenerous would be her, not him. Each time, something very small in her stepped backward, not enough for her to see herself disappearing, but enough that years later, standing before a mirror, she no longer knew why she was so tired. The Carter family was a place where peace was always presented as a moral virtue. Margaret Carter was not a cruel woman. She did not speak harshly, did not scold her daughter-in-law, did not interfere in loud ways. She was so polite that her politeness sometimes cut sharper than an insult. Her house always had cloth napkins at dinner, fresh flowers in the living room, a social calendar thick with fundraisers, church gatherings, company parties, family birthdays. She believed a good family did not expose private matters, did not let guests see cracks, did not say difficult things at the dinner table if they could be said later in a smaller voice. Robert was stern in a different way. He said little, but his silence made everyone adjust themselves. At Carter Construction, the Carter name meant credibility, deadlines, discretion, no scandals. Daniel had grown up in that house, learning how to smile when asked a difficult question, how to call a mistake pressure, how to say "we'll review it" instead of "I was wrong." When Emily entered that family, they cherished her because she helped the structure run more smoothly. Margaret praised her for knowing how to keep a home peaceful. Robert said Daniel was lucky to have a wife who knew how to balance him. Nathan joked that Emily was the unofficial damage control department of the Carter family. Everyone laughed. Emily laughed too. Only later did she understand that many family jokes are confessions wrapped for easier swallowing. In the Carter house, truth was not entirely forbidden. It simply had to dress well, speak softly, choose the right moment, avoid embarrassing Robert, avoid giving Margaret a headache, avoid making Nathan feel belittled, avoid making Daniel look like a man who had lost control of his own life. And because truth had to pass through so many gates of approval, most of it died before it reached the table. Nathan's project began the way most Carter disasters began, with a dinner that appeared kind. Nathan wanted to start a company renovating old houses and developing Charlotte neighborhoods. He talked about restoring abandoned homes, hiring local workers, doing something meaningful instead of always living in the shadow of his father's company. Nathan was not evil. He was weak, easily excited, often in debt because he believed in ideas before he believed in plans. Robert did not trust him to be disciplined enough. Margaret loved her younger son and feared Robert would crush him. Daniel stood in the middle, the eldest brother, voice steady, saying family had to lift one another when things were hard. At first, Daniel told Emily he was only looking over the paperwork for Nathan. Then he said there might need to be a letter of professional reference. Then perhaps a limited guarantee, but nothing that affects our money. Emily was wary immediately. She had worked in the nonprofit world long enough to know that phrases like "just a formality" were often where the deepest risks hid. She asked directly, "Is my name in any of the paperwork?" Daniel was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie before a meeting with Robert and Nathan. He looked at her through the mirror and smiled wearily. "Do you think I would put you into something without telling you?" That should have been reassurance. But after many years, Emily heard the missing part. It was not, "I would never do that." It was, "Do you really think I'm that bad?" She fell silent. Daniel turned and placed his hands on her shoulders. "I know you're worried, but Nathan needs a chance. Family means lifting each other when it gets hard." Emily said, "Family also means telling the truth about risk." Daniel kissed her forehead. "That's why I love you. You always think of the hard part." "I'll be careful." He said "I'll be careful" in the exact same voice he had once used to say, "I ordered the flowers, I sent the documents, I told the client." The voice had not changed. Only Emily by then had begun to hear the hollowness inside it. He was not careful, or he called his recklessness by another name. 2 weeks later, Emily saw a line in an email thread Daniel had forgotten to log out of on the home computer, and it chilled her. Emily fully supports the guarantee arrangement and understands this is a family-backed bridge measure. The email had been sent from Daniel's account to the project lawyer and Nathan, but the wording made it sound as though Emily had clearly agreed. She read the sentence again and again. Fully supports, understands. Family-backed, bridge measure, clean, beautiful words, legitimizing something she had never said. When Daniel came home, she had printed the email and placed it on the kitchen table. He looked at it and exhaled at once, not the exhale of a man caught, but of a man irritated that an inconvenient conversation was about to happen. I was just expressing the general idea, he said. Emily stood on the other side of the table. What general idea? You said you hoped Nathan could make it work. Hope is not a guarantee. I didn't say you signed anything. I said you supported the family helping him. You used my name in a legal email. Daniel rubbed his face. Not legal in the way you're making it sound. It was just so the other side understood I wasn't acting against unity in the family. Emily gave a very small laugh. But you were. He looked at her with just enough hurt. Do you want me to humiliate Nathan in front of his lawyer? She stood still. This was the most frightening thing about Daniel. He did not deny everything. He admitted one small piece, then shifted the weight of the rest onto someone else's feelings. If she kept objecting, she was no longer the person asking for truth. She became the person who wanted to embarrass Nathan, upset the family, make things difficult for Daniel. Correct the email, she said. Send one right now saying I did not agree. Daniel was silent. Right now. He sat down, opened his laptop, and typed an email much shorter than what she had demanded. To clarify, Emily and I are still reviewing details, but we remain supportive of finding a constructive family solution. Emily read it and knew it was still vague. But that night she was tired. She told herself at least he had corrected it. One part of her still wanted to believe he had not meant to hurt her. Another part, smaller but brighter, began to remember. Sophie Lane heard about it the next day at lunch in a cafe near Emily's office. Sophie was Emily's best friend from college and now a divorce lawyer, with the annoying ability to see through carefully wrapped self-justifications. She had not hated Daniel from the beginning, but she had never been charmed by his politeness. When Emily told her about the email, Sophie set down her latte and asked, "Did you agree in writing?" Emily shook her head. "Did you sign anything?" "No." "Did you say anything like, go ahead and use my name?" "No. But I did say I hoped Nathan would be okay." Sophie looked at her for a moment. "Emily, hoping someone is okay is not a guarantee." Emily looked through the window, where a mother was pushing a stroller along the damp sidewalk. "Daniel is under pressure. He loves Nathan. He didn't mean." Sophie raised a hand gently to stop her. "Do you realize the sentence 'he didn't mean to' always ends with you cleaning up?" Emily did not answer. Sophie softened her voice. "I'm not saying you have to leave him over one email. I'm saying you need to call this what it is. He used your credibility to make other people believe in his decision. If this falls apart, guess who will be called the one who knew and didn't speak?" Emily stirred her tea, though the sugar had already dissolved. "I don't want to turn everything into a war," Sophie sighed. "One day you'll have to ask yourself whether you are preserving the marriage or preserving him from consequences." That sentence did not change Emily immediately. True sentences rarely change people immediately. They stay inside like a stone in a shoe, at first only uncomfortable, later with every step impossible to ignore. In the days that followed, Daniel became even gentler. That was what made Emily uneasy. He bought the mint tea she liked and left it on the kitchen counter with a note that said, "For your late nights." He texted her in the middle of the day to ask whether she had eaten lunch. He held her longer than usual before bed, but the embrace no longer made her feel held. It made her feel tested for softness. One evening, while she was washing dishes, he stepped beside the sink, picked up a towel to dry plates and said, "I know you're worried. I don't want Nathan's situation to become something between us." She looked at the soap foam on her hands. "It became something between us the moment you used my name." He exhaled, soft, patient. "I used your name because you're my wife. That isn't a license." "I didn't say it was a license. You acted like it was." Daniel set the dried plate on the rack. "You're turning me into someone worse than I am." That stopped her hand. He was not saying he was innocent. He was saying she was making him look worse. That had always been the center of him. Not what he had done, but the appearance of what he had done. "Maybe I've only stopped making you look better," she said. He looked at her, and for a moment something cold crossed his eyes. Very quick. So quick that if Emily had still wanted not to see it, she could have missed it. But she saw, and once she saw, she could not forget. Nathan's project failed faster than even Emily's most cautious fears. 3 months later, subcontractors were demanding payment. A deposit had been misused. A client threatened to sue over the delayed renovation. Robert discovered that the Carter Construction name had been referenced in several exchanges as an unofficial guarantee of credibility. Margaret called Emily on a Friday afternoon, her voice trembling, asking whether she knew about Nathan's paperwork. Emily said she knew Daniel had looked over some things, but she did not know the details. Margaret paused, then said, "Daniel told us you had agreed to because you wanted to help Nathan." Emily stood in the middle of the non-profit office, surrounded by reading campaign posters and boxed communications materials, and felt the floor tilt. What did you say? Margaret's breathing was thin. The family is talking Sunday night. I think you and Daniel should explain clearly, so his father won't be so angry. Explain clearly. Emily looked at her computer screen, where Daniel's email using her name was still saved in a folder. She knew something was coming, but she still did not understand how far Daniel had gone. At that same moment, Avery Mitchell, Emily's co-worker, poked her head into the office and asked if Emily had approved the press release for the fundraiser. Emily stared at Avery and took a few seconds to understand the question. Are you okay? Avery asked. Emily opened her mouth to say fine, the word already living on her tongue like a reflex. But it did not come out right away. She only said, "Give me 10 minutes. Avery nodded, watched her a little longer, then closed the door. Emily sat down, reopened Daniel's email, and took another screenshot even though she had already saved it, as if she needed to see the black letters on the white background to believe she had not imagined them. Fully supports, understands, family backed. She did not know then that those words would become the first brick in the final wall between her and Daniel. At the family meeting that night, Daniel was not passive at all. He sat beside Emily in his parents' living room, his hand near hers but not touching it, shoulders straight, face carrying the weariness of responsibility. Robert stood beside the fireplace, holding a stack of papers, his voice low and cold. Nathan sat on the leather chair, his face gray. Margaret kept asking whether anyone needed more tea, though no one was drinking. On the wall hung Carter family photographs from over the years. Daniel and Nathan in baseball uniforms, Robert receiving an award from the Builders Association, Margaret in a blue dress at church, Daniel and Emily's wedding photo in a silver frame on the shelf, where Emily was smiling with the smile of someone who did not yet know that one day her face would be used as evidence of false peace. Robert said, "Who gave the lawyer the impression this project had the family's moral guarantee?" Nathan looked at Daniel. Daniel exhaled, like a man willing to accept partial blame but wanting everyone to see that he was trying to be mature. I spoke with Nathan. I thought we could help him within controlled limits. Emily knew about it. We decided together that if there was a way to support him without directly affecting the company, we should try. The room turned toward Emily. She heard the word "we" like a cuff closing around her wrist. Nathan lowered his head. Margaret looked at her with a vague, pleading expression. Robert looked at her as if trying to confirm that she truly had been part of this foolish decision. Daniel did not look at her. He only placed his hand over hers where no one could fully see, his thumb pressing lightly against her knuckle. "Don't," not a spoken word but as clear as a command. Emily felt anger rising fast, but with it came an older fear. If she denied it immediately, Nathan would be crushed by Robert, Margaret would cry, Daniel would say she had blown everything up before he could fix it, and the entire Carter family would look at her like the cold wife who had thrown her husband into the middle of the room. She swallowed. "I knew Daniel wanted to help Nathan," she said slowly, "but I never agreed to a financial guarantee or to having my name used as confirmation." Daniel turned to her at once, a strained smile appearing for half a second. I thought we talked about." "No," Emily said, clearer this time, "we never agreed on that." The air froze. Margaret let out a very small breath. Robert looked at Daniel. Nathan closed his eyes. Daniel released her hand as though she had wounded him in front of everyone. After the meeting, Daniel pulled Emily into the hallway near the dining room, where Carter family photos lined the wall. Daniel's graduation, Nathan as a child, Emily and Daniel's wedding portrait in a silver frame. He did not raise his voice. Daniel rarely raised his voice when he could make another person feel like the one losing control. "What are you doing?" he asked. Emily looked at him. "Telling the truth." "Not then." "Then when?" "After everyone decides," I agreed. He rubbed his forehead. "I'll fix it." "But denying it in front of my father made everything worse." "You lied in front of your father." "I said it the way I understood the situation." "You said I decided with you." Daniel lowered his voice even more. "Nathan is falling apart. My mother is panicking. My father is waiting for a reason to cut him off from the company. Tonight, I needed you to help me keep things calm." Emily looked at him as if a familiar door had suddenly opened into a strange room. "And you?" "I'll handle it." "How?" "I'm trying to find a way." "No, you're trying to find a way for me to stand between you and what you did." Daniel glanced around, afraid someone might hear. "Don't talk as if I meant to hurt you. You know I didn't mean to." That sentence, the old sentence, the worn sentence, the one that had softened her so many times, no longer opened the door inside her that night. "Not meaning to doesn't give my name back to me," she said. Daniel was silent. In that silence, Emily saw something painfully clear. Daniel was not afraid of hurting her with the truth. He was afraid that her telling the truth would make him look bad. And when they returned to the living room, Daniel walked half a step ahead of her, his shoulders slightly tense, like a husband made difficult by his wife in front of the family. Emily watched his back and realized he had already begun performing the next version before the old story had even ended. Margaret called the following Sunday dinner a gentle meal so everyone can stop being so tense. But Emily understood from the moment she entered the Carter house that the dinner had been staged for her. The dining room looked more polished than usual. The white china had been set out. There was red wine, roast meat, green beans with almonds, garlic butter bread, pear salad, the one Emily had once praised and Margaret always made when she wanted things to feel intimate. Nathan arrived early but did not look at her for long. Robert's face was cold. Margaret hugged Emily at the door, stroked her back lightly, and said, "I just hope tonight everyone can speak to one another with love." Emily heard the missing part. With love meant do not make Daniel uncomfortable. Daniel sat beside her. Before the main course was served, he took a pen from his pocket, wrote on the napkin beneath the table, and slid it toward her. "I'm sorry for the confusion." She looked at the sentence. Daniel leaned closer. "Just say you're sorry for making everyone misunderstand. Not that you're taking all the blame, just opening the door. After that, I'll explain." Emily looked up. Everyone was looking at her in different ways. Margaret with trembling expectation, Robert with impatience, Nathan with guilt and the hope of being saved, Daniel with the calm of a man who believed he knew her. In that moment, 12 years flashed through Emily out of order. Her mother's birthday flowers, the piano recital, the tax papers, client emails, calls she had made on his behalf. Dinners where she smiled when she did not want to. Every time Daniel said, "You say things better than I do." Every time Margaret praised her for keeping the peace. Every time Robert nodded at Daniel because Emily had cleaned up the backstage mess. All those moments led to this napkin. A pre-written apology, one mouth that lied, and another mouth expected to clean it. Emily placed the napkin on the table very slowly. "I am not apologizing for a decision I did not make," she said. The sentence was not loud, but it moved through the dining room like the sound of a glass cracking. Margaret blinked, her face wounded as though Emily had said something obscene. Robert looked at Daniel. Nathan bowed his head even lower. Daniel let out a very soft laugh, the kind of laugh used to make someone else look overly emotional. "Emily is under a lot of stress," he said, placing his hand over hers. "This has been misunderstood on several sides." Emily pulled her hand away. This time the movement was clear enough for Margaret to see. "No," she said, "I was not misunderstood, I was misused." Daniel's face tightened. "We can talk about this privately. You used my name in front of everyone." Robert set down his knife. "Daniel, what does this mean?" Daniel turned to his father. "Dad, I'll explain. Emily is reacting because she feels pulled into something she hadn't." "Don't explain my feelings for me," Emily cut in. It was the first time in 12 years she had interrupted Daniel in front of his family. The room did not know what to do with it. Margaret said very softly, "Emily, I think you should be a little softer. Everyone is hurting." Emily looked at her. "So am I." Margaret looked as if she had been slapped by a truth she had not prepared a place for. The dinner did not end in shouting. It ended in broken sentences. Daniel saying he would handle it later, Robert saying he needed to review all the paperwork, Nathan mumbling an apology without saying clearly what he was sorry for, Margaret clearing plates too early so her hands would have something to do. Emily left with Daniel in silence. In the car he drove through the dark Charlotte streets, streetlights sliding across the windshield. For the first 10 minutes he said nothing. Then he said, "You made me look like a liar in front of my family." Emily looked outside. "You were a liar in front of your family." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You used to have more compassion." That hurt because it struck exactly at her old identity. But that night, for the first time, she did not rush to rescue it. "No," she said. "I used to be easier to use." Daniel fought back not with one large argument, but with small stories planted in everyone. He called Margaret first, saying Emily was under pressure at work, that her organization was about to lose funding, that she was sensitive about money because of her unstable childhood, that he probably should not have used wording that made her feel included, but that she was also reacting more strongly than necessary. Margaret texted Emily 2 days later. "I love you, sweetheart, but I hope you won't let old fears hurt Daniel. He means well, he's just clumsy." Emily read the message in her office, in the middle of a day full of grant emails and communications meetings, and felt a coldness move down her back. Daniel had taken the things she had once told him on nights of deepest trust, about her mother crying over the electric bill, about her fear of debt, about how much she hated feeling financially out of control, and turned them into reasons for his family to view her reaction as an old wound, rather than a reasonable response to a present lie. He told Robert that Emily did not understand how family guarantees worked in business. He told Nathan he was trying to protect everyone, but Emily needed time to calm down. He told a few friends the marriage was strained because Emily had trouble accepting risk. None of those sentences were entirely fabricated. That was why they were dangerous. Daniel did not need to invent a monster. He only needed to adjust the lighting so Emily looked like someone overreacting. And because that lighting was set by a polite man with a good job, a stern father, a beautifully crying mother, and a younger brother collapsing, people almost willingly stood where he needed them to stand. At home, Daniel became patient in a way that felt unbearable. He did not confront Emily immediately. He let her smell the isolation for herself. Margaret texted less, but every message carried a small blade wrapped in cotton. I hope you and Daniel find common ground. Every family has misunderstandings. Sometimes keeping peace is a form of love. Robert did not text. But Daniel told her his father was very disappointed with how you handled yourself in front of everyone. Nathan sent one short apology, then vanished. Daniel arranged all those reactions around Emily like furniture in a room, so wherever she moved she bumped into the feeling that she was the one making everything heavier. One evening, he left his phone on the kitchen table, the screen lighting up with a message from Margaret. Is she willing to listen? Emily saw it before she could look away. Daniel picked up the phone and sighed, not hiding it, as though the very fact that he was not hiding it proved his innocence. My mother is just worried. She called me she. You know she doesn't mean anything bad. Of course. See, this is what I mean. You're reading everything in the worst possible way. Emily looked at him and felt tired down to the bone. This was how Daniel had won for years. He did not have to call her crazy. He only had to make her wonder whether she was being too harsh. He did not have to forbid her to speak. He only had to turn every sentence she said into evidence that she was making the room less comfortable. Sophie helped Emily build the timeline on a Thursday night in Sophie's apartment, where the small dining table was covered in papers, a laptop, cold tea, and a container of Thai takeout neither of them had eaten. Emily brought printed emails, texts, joint account statements, a photo of the napkin, and old emails Daniel had once asked her to write for him. Sophie wore glasses, her hair tied high, reading each item with a calm professionalism that made Emily both grateful and ashamed. I don't want to turn my marriage into a case file, Emily said. Sophie did not look up. Daniel did that before you got to name it. They arranged everything by date. The day Daniel first mentioned Nathan's project. The day the fully supports email was sent. The day he sent the vague clarification. The day Robert was told. They decided together. The night of the napkin dinner. Daniel's text to Emily. Don't embarrass Nathan, this is more complicated than you think. Another. My mother is really hoping you'll help smooth this over. A voicemail Nathan left after midnight, his voice drunk and panicked. I'm sorry. Daniel said you knew. Daniel said you weren't happy but you'd understand. I didn't think it would go this far. Sophie stopped the recording and looked at Emily. This. Emily stared at the audio waveform. Nathan is weak. Daniel can say he was confused. That's fine, I don't need one piece, I need the pattern. Pattern. The word hurt Emily more than any single event, because when everything was placed side by side, she could no longer call this one bad night, one misunderstanding, one family pressure. She could see the structure of her marriage. Daniel lied or half-lied, Emily softened it. Daniel was spared, Emily was praised for maturity. Then the next cycle grew larger. Sophie pulled over an empty folder and wrote on the label, not feelings, facts. Emily stared at the line for a long time. She had lived too long in a world where Daniel's feelings were used as reasons, and her facts were called too rigid. Now each piece of paper lay on the table like a cold stone, and she was both afraid and grateful because they did not cry, did not justify themselves, did not ask her to soften. Nathan confessed more clearly on a Monday afternoon in the parking lot behind Robert's office. Emily had not planned to meet him. She had gone there to collect a copy of the project documents from the administrative department, as Sophie had advised her to request them directly before Daniel could adjust the context. Nathan stood beside his old truck, shirt wrinkled, eyes shadowed, looking smaller than his age. Emily, he called. She stopped but did not step closer. Nathan swallowed. I'm sorry. The sentence exhausted her immediately. In recent weeks, people had been apologizing to her in ways that asked her to make them feel lighter. For what? She asked. Nathan looked down. For letting Daniel talk like you agreed. I really thought you knew. Daniel said you weren't happy but you'd understand. Said you were good at calming everyone down, so if there was a problem, you'd help the family see it clearly. Emily stood still. Do you still have the texts? Nathan took out his phone, scrolled for a while, then handed it to her. A message from Daniel appeared. Emily will calm everyone down if this goes sideways. Don't panic. Emily read it. Not long, not ornate, not wrapped, and because of that, more brutal than all the rest. Daniel had considered the possibility that everything might go wrong, and in his contingency plan, Emily was not the person to be protected. She was the shock absorber, the one expected to take the impact. Send it to me, she said. Nathan nodded at once, his eyes red. I didn't think he would. Yes, Emily said not loudly. You did. You just hoped I would play the role. Nathan did not argue. She received the text and turned away. Behind her, Nathan said, This family always lets you clean up. Emily stopped for 1 second. From Nathan's mouth, the sentence sounded both late and true. She did not turn around. I know, she said. And for the first time, I know did not mean forgiveness. Daniel did not only control the story inside the family. Emily realized that at a fundraiser for her organization on a Friday night, when he appeared in a navy suit wearing the smile of a husband supporting his wife, Emily had not wanted him there, but he had said that if he stayed away, people would ask questions, and she did not have the energy to explain while trying to raise money for school library programs. Daniel moved among donors, shaking hands, praising the program, placing his hand very lightly at the small of her back when someone took a photo. He said the right thing to the right person. To the foundation director, he said Emily worked too hard but he was proud of her. To a board member, he said he had always believed community education was the foundation of a healthy city. To Avery Mitchell, Emily's colleague, he asked about the new communications project with such attention that Avery smiled at first. Then Avery stood near the wine table while Daniel spoke with another board member. Emily was only a few steps away, close enough to hear part of it. Daniel said warmly, Emily is going through a difficult season. She always wants to carry everything perfectly. So I'm just trying to be there and not push her too hard. The other person nodded, moved. Avery looked straight at Emily. Emily stood with a glass of water in her hand and felt as though her skin had been peeled off in the middle of the crowd while no one saw blood. Daniel had just placed himself in the role of patient husband to an unstable wife, right inside her professional world, where she should have been seen through her own competence. After the event, Avery pulled her into the hallway behind the venue. Are you okay? Emily almost said fine. The word had lived in her mouth as a reflex, but she stopped. No. Avery did not ask more right away. She only nodded, as though accepting a truth that did not need beautifying. I heard what he said. I don't like how he turned himself into the kind person in your story. Emily looked down at her aching high heels. I don't either. The sentence was small, but it was a window. Someone outside the Carter family had heard. Someone who had not been trained to protect Daniel. That night, on the way home, Daniel realized something had changed. He drove with his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, his face passing through the streetlights in intervals. Avery looked at me strangely, he said. Emily did not answer right away. What did you say to her? Not much. Emily, you said enough. He glanced at her. I was just trying to explain in case you seemed tense. To my coworker, I'm your husband. You used that sentence like a master key. Daniel exhaled. I can't do anything right anymore, can I? This was the sentence he used when pushed to a place where he could no longer defend himself with facts. It turned the specific issue into his pain. It invited Emily to abandon the subject in order to reassure him that no, he was not that bad, he still did many things right, she was just upset. But that night she looked out the window. I don't know. Have you tried telling the truth? He was silent the rest of the drive. When the car stopped in front of the house, he did not get out immediately. You're letting Sophie influence you, he said. Emily gave a very small laugh. That's what you're choosing? Now it's my friend's fault. I'm just saying she works in divorce. She sees everything through that lens. And you work in construction. You see everything like something to cover temporarily before the inspector comes. Daniel turned to her. In the dark, his face was no longer fully polite. You're becoming bitter. Emily opened the car door. No, I'm becoming more accurate. The house Emily shared with Daniel became a waiting room for divorce before anyone said the word divorce. Everything remained where it had always been. His toothbrush beside the sink, his jacket on the chair, the coffee mug he used every morning, his running shoes beside the back door. But those objects no longer proved a shared life. They looked like props left behind after a play. Daniel still tried to keep his voice soft. He asked whether she had eaten dinner, asked whether her car needed an oil change, said he had bought the yogurt she liked. Those gestures once might have softened her. Now they made her feel tested. Every time he said, "We need to get through this," she heard, "You need to return to your old position." One night, she stood in the bathroom and removed her wedding ring, placing it beside the glass cup. Her finger had a pale mark where the ring had sat for 12 years. She stared at that mark so long the water in the sink ran cold. Some things, even when removed, still leave their shape. Daniel knocked on the door. "Are you okay?" She looked at the ring. "No." There was silence outside for a few seconds. "Can I come in?" No, such a simple word, she barely recognized her own voice as she said it. Daniel did not try to open the door. He was smart enough not to be crude. He only stood outside and said, "I love you. I just don't know how to fix this if you keep putting up walls." Emily looked at herself in the mirror. "You don't want to fix it. You want me to go back to being the door." Silence outside. Then his footsteps moved away. Emily picked up the ring but did not put it back on. She placed it in the bathroom drawer beside a few old hair ties and a nearly empty tube of hand cream. Daniel proposed a private apology the next evening. He sat at the kitchen table where they had once eaten rushed spaghetti, signed the papers to buy the house, wrapped Christmas gifts, and talked about adopting a dog before ultimately deciding they were both too busy. He had made tea for her. A cup of chamomile sat on the right side where she usually sat. "I'm not asking you to apologize to everyone anymore," he said. Emily stood by the counter and did not sit. "How generous." His lips tightened. "I'm trying to meet you halfway." "Halfway between what?" "Between the fact that you feel hurt and the fact that my family is hurting too." "I don't feel hurt. I was hurt." Daniel closed his eyes for 1 second. "Fine. You were hurt, I understand." She almost laughed because he said "I understand" as if checking off an item on a list. He went on, "Just call my mother. Tell her you regret that dinner became tense. Not that you were at fault. Just open the door to reconciliation." Emily asked, "Are you planning to tell the truth first?" Daniel was silent. She nodded as if she had received the answer. "So you want me to open the door so you can walk through it without carrying what you did?" He leaned forward. "You're choosing right and wrong over the marriage." That made her look at him for a long time. For 12 years, Daniel had known how to turn his responsibility into a test of her love. If she loved him, she would soften. If she chose the marriage, she would let it go. If she were mature, she would not need right and wrong. "No," Emily said. "I'm realizing you have always called protecting the marriage." Daniel looked at her as though she had said something that could not be taken back, and it could not. The final dinner at the Carter house took place 2 days later. Emily agreed to go, but this time she brought a file. Not in a large bag that would draw attention. Just a thin black folder tucked into her purse, containing emails, texts, voicemail transcripts, bank statements, the guarantee draft, the photo of the napkin, and the text Nathan had sent. "Emily will calm everyone down if this goes sideways." Sophie had helped her arrange them in order. Avery had sent a written note about what Daniel had said at the fundraiser. Emily did not know exactly how she would use all of it, but she knew that if she walked into that room empty-handed, Daniel would use his voice again to wrap everything in fog. On the drive to the Carter house, Daniel drove, occasionally glancing at her, perhaps trying to measure the danger in her silence. "I want us to stay calm tonight," he said. "I want everyone to focus on solutions." Emily looked at her hands resting on her purse. "Solutions for whom? For the family." "Which family?" He frowned. "You know what I mean." "No, Daniel. I'm only starting to listen more carefully." He said nothing else. The Carter house appeared behind a line of oak trees, its windows glowing yellow, the front porch clean, a wreath on the door though it was nowhere near the holidays. That house had once made Emily feel admitted into something larger than her own life. Tonight it looked like a building where she had worked unpaid for too long. The Carter dining room was still beautiful. Margaret had still set out the white china, though this time there were no scented candles, perhaps because even she no longer had the strength to pretend. Robert sat at the head of the table. Nathan sat beside Margaret. Daniel came in with Emily, but they did not touch. Once everyone sat down, Daniel began first, as Emily knew he would. "I think tonight we should focus on how to resolve this, not on blame." Emily opened her purse. "That's your favorite sentence." Daniel looked at her. "Emily," she placed the folder on the table. "No, tonight I'm going to finish speaking." Margaret's voice trembled. "What are you doing?" Emily looked at her, not coldly, but no longer with her old softness either. "What I should have done a long time ago. Letting the truth stand without holding its hand and apologizing for it." She placed the first email on the table. "This is the email Daniel sent to the project lawyer saying I fully supported the guarantee arrangement. I never agreed." She placed the second email down. "This is the email he sent after I asked him to correct it. You'll see that it still doesn't say I had not agreed. It only keeps using the word supportive. Daniel said, I was trying to keep the language gentle so Nathan wouldn't be humiliated. Emily placed the text down. This is the text you sent me. Don't embarrass Nathan. Every time you say the truth will embarrass someone. I'm the one who is supposed to stay quiet. Robert picked up the paper, his face unchanged but his eyes heavier. Emily placed Nathan's voicemail transcript down. Nathan said Daniel told him I knew and would understand. Nathan looked down, then said very quietly, Yes. Margaret began to cry. Daniel turned toward his brother. Nathan, you're misunderstanding the context. Nathan shook his head. No, you said she wasn't happy but she would calm everyone down. Emily placed the final text on the table, the smallest piece of paper and the heaviest one. And this is what Daniel sent Nathan before the project fell apart. Emily will calm everyone down if this goes sideways. Don't panic. The room went so quiet Emily could hear the refrigerator running in the next room. Daniel stared at the paper. For 1 second he had no words. Not because he had run out of intelligence, but because this time the truth was not in Emily's mouth for him to call emotional. It was on paper, cold, clear, unable to be ashamed on his behalf. Daniel? Robert said. Only his name. Nothing more was needed. Daniel inhaled. I said that in a stressful moment. I know Emily is good at calming people down. I didn't mean to turn her into. Into what? Emily asked. Finish the sentence. He looked at her, his eyes dark. You are making this heavier than it needs to be. Emily almost smiled. No, I'm only done making what you do lighter. Margaret cried out loud now. Why couldn't you two say this privately? Why bring documents to the dinner table? Emily looked at the woman she had once genuinely loved. Because this dinner table is where I was asked to apologize for his lie. Margaret turned her face away as if the truth was too direct. Robert set the papers down and looked at Daniel with an expression Emily had never seen him give his eldest son. Not loud anger, but a disappointment so deep and heavy there was no way out of it. You used your wife's name, he said. Daniel answered, I was trying to protect Nathan. Robert continued, and then you used your wife to protect you. Daniel did not answer. Nathan broke down one choked sound, then said, I'm sorry, Emily. I should have asked you directly. Emily nodded. Yes, not it's okay. Not I understand. Just yes. Some apologies need to be left alone in their own weight. After that dinner no one hugged Emily like in a movie. Margaret did not run to apologize, did not take her hands and say she should have known. She was too hurt and too attached to the family image to immediately separate her own pain from the truth. Robert handled the papers with Nathan and Daniel, but he could not look at Emily the way he had before, because she was no longer the person who made the Carter house comfortable. Nathan stood in the hallway and said, I'm sorry one more time, but this time Emily only nodded, because she was no longer performing baptism for other people's remorse. Daniel followed her onto the porch as she prepared to leave. The night was cold. The grass in front of the house was wet with dew, the porch light yellow and thin. You humiliated me, he said. Emily stood beside the car, the folder lighter in her bag but her body heavy as lead. You're wrong. I only gave back what you made me carry for too long. Daniel looked at her. You think you won? She was so tired the question could not touch her pride anymore. No, I think we lost a long time ago. You're destroying our marriage over something that could be fixed. No, she said. The marriage ended when you wrote your apology on a napkin and handed it to me to read. He was silent. Maybe he wanted to say he loved her. Maybe he wanted to say she was too hurt to see clearly. Maybe he wanted to say any of the sentences that had once pulled her back. But her face that night had no place left for those sentences to land. She got into the car. As she drove away, she did not cry. Not because it did not hurt. Because some pain endured too long eventually turns into a cold, numb place where tears arrive later than the decision. The next morning, Emily packed a suitcase in thin sunlight. The house was offensively quiet. Outside, there was the backing beep of a garbage truck, the sound of small birds on the power line, the sound of Daniel turning on the coffee maker as he did every day. The smell of coffee drifted up the stairs. She folded clothes into the suitcase without her usual care. A few shirts rolled quickly, a few books, her laptop, medication, personal papers. She went into the bathroom and took her wedding ring from the drawer. The pale mark on her finger had begun to fade, but it was still there. In the pocket of the jacket hanging over a chair, she found the napkin from the night before, though she did not remember putting it there. The sentence, "I'm sorry for the confusion," remained on the fabric, the blue ink slightly blurred at the corner. Daniel stood in the bedroom doorway as she zipped the suitcase. For the first time he looked genuinely afraid. Not irritated, not tired, not misunderstood. Afraid. "Let's not end like this," he said. Emily carried the napkin and ring downstairs. She placed both on the table exactly where he usually set his coffee mug. "This is the last sentence you wrote for me in this marriage," she said, "and I will not read it for you." Daniel looked at the napkin, then at the ring. "Emily, I'm sorry." She heard the words. They should have done something inside her. They did nothing. "What are you sorry for?" she asked. Daniel opened his mouth, but 1 second passed too long. She nodded slightly. "Exactly." Then she pulled her suitcase to the door. He did not stop her. Daniel knew well enough that if he touched her now, he would become the kind of man he had spent his entire life proving he was not. He only stood in the kitchen, beside the napkin, beside the wedding ring, beside the steaming coffee cup, for the first time, with no Emily standing between him and the true shape of consequence. The first weeks afterward did not feel like freedom. Emily stayed at Sophie's apartment for 2 nights, then rented a small apartment on the other side of Charlotte, where the living room window looked out at bare winter trees and an entirely unromantic parking lot. The apartment had no large dining room, no white china, no Sunday dinners where she had to smile at the correct moment. It had a gray sofa she bought herself, a small round table just big enough for 4 people, a bookshelf not yet fully arranged, and a kitchen corner where she sometimes stood still longer than necessary, because she was not used to no longer needing to cook extra for Daniel. Some evenings, she opened the refrigerator and found only yogurt, eggs, vegetables, and 1 container of her own leftovers, and felt a strange grief because there was no longer anyone else's portion to calculate. It was not that she missed Daniel in a way that made her want to return. She missed the old body of her life, missed knowing what she was supposed to do in each room, missed a role so familiar that taking it off felt like standing outside in the cold without a coat. She began therapy every Tuesday. In the first session, the therapist asked her what she felt, and Emily almost answered by explaining Daniel, Margaret, Nathan, Robert, the project, the money, the dinners. The therapist listened, then said, "I asked what you feel." Emily was silent for a very long time. She had become so good at soothing the room that sometimes she no longer knew whether the room inside her was burning or merely dark. She learned to sit with silence without rushing to fill it, learned to let other people be disappointed without automatically repairing it, learned not to turn every unanswered text into a moral crisis. Some days she still wanted to text Margaret, wanted to say she did not hate her, wanted to explain that she had lost the Carter family too, not merely left it, wanted people to understand she was not cruel. But then she remembered that Margaret had read the truth on paper, and still asked why documents had to be brought to the dinner table. Emily set the phone down, not because she no longer cared, because she understood not every misunderstanding required her to sacrifice another piece of herself to repair it. Sophie came over for dinner on a rainy evening, bringing a bottle of wine and a bouquet of sunflowers far too bright for the small apartment. Avery sent flowers to congratulate Emily on receiving a higher-level communications position at the organization, a position she might once have turned down because she feared the schedule would make Daniel uncomfortable at family events. Nathan sent a longer apology text, saying he had begun treatment for a mild gambling addiction and was working with Robert to repay the debt. Emily read it and replied briefly, "I hope you mean it. No, I forgive you. No, it's okay." Margaret did not text for nearly 2 months. Robert sent, through the lawyer, confirmation that Emily's name was no longer connected to any project documents. Daniel sent an email after 3 months, 2 pages long, opening with, "I'm sorry if you feel I put you in a difficult position." Emily stopped reading at "if you feel." She did not keep reading right away. She set the laptop down, made tea, and stood by the window watching rain run down the glass. Before she would have read the whole thing, analyzed every sentence, searched for the true part inside all that self-protective language, and answered in a way that was not too cold, not too angry, not too likely to make him feel attacked. That night she came back, closed the email, and did not reply. An apology that begins with a condition does not need the recipient to finish it. Spring came, and Charlotte turned green again in a way that felt almost cruel, as if the city did not know some people had crossed winter without healing. Emily went to work, attended meetings, wrote speeches, edited fundraising campaigns, answered donors in a professional voice. Her colleagues said she looked different, not happier, not lighter, just different. Avery did not pressure her to tell more, but sometimes placed coffee on her desk and said, "You don't have to answer right away." That sentence became a small gift. No need to answer right away, no need to soothe right away, no need to fix right away. In therapy, Emily realized she often apologized before saying anything difficult. Sorry for replying late, sorry for not being able to help, sorry for making someone sad. One week, The therapist asked her to try not apologizing in situations where she had done nothing wrong. Emily failed on the first day, apologizing to a cashier for taking too long to find her card. She came home, sat on the sofa, laughed, then cried. Not a pretty cry. A dry, angry, exhausted cry. She had spent almost her whole life apologizing for taking up space. Daniel had only learned how to use something that was already in her and call it love. The final scene of that winter was not radiant. Emily opened a cardboard box under her desk to look for a few tax documents. Inside the box were things she had not known what to do with: a wedding photograph, a few old anniversary cards, the key to the old house she no longer used, her wedding ring in a small cloth pouch, and the napkin with the blue sentence. She picked up the napkin. The fabric had wrinkled. The ink had faded slightly. "I'm sorry for the confusion." The sentence looked much smaller now than the weight it had once carried. She did not tear it, did not burn it, did not throw it in the trash. She only folded it and placed it in the drawer with her wedding ring. Not as a relic of love, but as proof of a life she had survived. Then she closed the drawer. Outside the window, bare trees stood still in the cold rain. The apartment was not warm in the way a complete family home was warm. There was no sound of someone in the kitchen, no one asking her to soften a mess they had made. No yellow light from the Carter dining room, no cloth napkins, no scented candles, no Daniel leaning close to hand her his apology. There was only Emily, less soft, less easy to use, and still not fully healed. But every sentence she spoke from then on, however short, however cold, however uncomfortable it made someone else, belonged to her, and that was what Daniel had lost forever. On the night he thought all he had to do was hand her a napkin, and she would bow her head one more time.